everyone, my name is Lauren-Jane and welcome to my channel, The Surgical Doctor. Today I am going to be talking about my elective. So I wanted to make this video for a while because my elective was an absolute disaster. And I kind of wanted to explore why, just to make sure for anyone who's thinking about going on an elective, they kind of consider some of the things that I'm going to raise so you can have a different experience to what I had. So I decided to go on my elective. I went to a country in Africa, I went to Tanzania, and I decided to go on my own. Because I was going on my own as a single female traveller, I went with an organisation called Work the World. And I went with them because I wanted to be guided and shepherded, really, because obviously I was on my own and I was going across the world by myself. So I booked to go to Tanzania. It was quite an expensive package. I was only intending to go for 2 weeks anyway because I was going to do the rest of my elective in the UK. And Work the World have this great package where they sort of pick you up from the airport. They've got a sort of a liveried t-shirt so you know who's picking you up, and they take you to what's effectively a compound. You have on-site staff members, and then there are obviously lots of midwives and nursing students and medical students that are, in theory, all going to the same hospital. And then you are taken back to the airport. You also have guides who take you to the hospitals. So when I was reading about this, it all felt very safe and secure. So because I was going alone, I decided to go with Work the World. It wasn't cheap. I think it cost me about £2,000 for this 2-week package. But I discussed it with my other half, and because I was going alone, it felt like the most sensible thing to do. My experience of booking was very easy, very convenient. After booking, I went out to do an obs and gynae themed elective, and as soon as I booked, I got a call from Work the World. They went through, I was on the phone to them for about an hour and a half, and they gave me so much information about the culture, and they went into details that I found were really excellent to think of. So they were talking about how Tanzania has quite a low rate of maternal mortality, but a very high rate of infant mortality, so babies dying in labour effectively. So what they said was, because of those statistics and that the babies were suffering but the mums were doing quite well, they do things like fundal pressure, which we don't do in the UK, which is effectively where, as the baby's coming out, they press on the top of the uterus to try and sort of urge the baby out. So they explained to me that that's something that I might see and the reasons for it, and that obviously that's something that we wouldn't do in the UK, so not to be surprised when I saw that. So I felt like I received a level of care where they were kind of thinking about my emotional well-being and not just sort of sending me out there to experience a system which was very different from ours in the UK. So I felt quite well prepared to go out there, and I did need to be, because as I come on to later, I did see a couple of things which were quite distressing. So I flew out, I was met at the airport and transferred to the compound. The compound was exactly as it kind of advertised as being. So it was spacious, shared a room with someone. The beds were fine, they were a little bit small. I mean, I'm only 5'4", but the bunk beds were quite small even for me. But it was clean, there were lots of people there, it was catered, there was security on the compound, and the guides that picked us up were fantastic, really great people. We also had lessons in how to speak the language, which was fantastic. There was a great tutor, great sense of community. So I can kind of hear you wondering, where did this go wrong? Well, there were 2 hospitals in Tanzania. So there was the main hospital and there was a maternity hospital. So it had said in the prospectus that they encouraged students to go on the local buses in order to attend the hospital. So I was kind of fine with that, because I assumed once I got out there I'd be with other medical students. But because I was on an obs and gynae elective and all of the other medical students were doing surgery or medicine, they were all over at the other hospital. So I was the only one going to this other hospital of the medical students. Now, there were 4 midwifery students who were also going to the maternity hospital, and they'd all come together, but they didn't get the bus, they got a taxi. And for anyone who's ever been in a car, you know that you're never going to get more than 4 people plus a taxi driver in the car. So what I found was that I was in a situation where I was going to have to go to the hospital by myself. So on the first day I went with a guide, and everything was fine. And then the second day I was going to go on the local bus with the guide again, and that would be my last day, and then I'd be getting myself home. So we got onto the bus, and in fact before we got onto the bus, there had been a lot of rain in Tanzania at that point. And as we were walking, there was a gentleman we were all walking on the road because both of the pathways were completely flooded. And as we were walking, I was in my scrubs and my white coat, and he came up to us and he wanted me to walk in the water, even though everyone else was walking on the road, which was dry. And my guide said, no, she's not going to walk in the water, she's walking on the road. And he kept following us and he kept saying, no, she's going to walk in the water, she's going to walk in there. And it made me feel really uncomfortable, and he was very hostile, and I didn't really understand why. And then from there, we were obviously walking to the bus stop, and I got onto the bus, and we were on the bus. The previous day, the trip had only taken about 15-20 minutes, something like that. We'd been on the bus for about 45 minutes, and I just couldn't work out what's happening, but luckily I had my guide with me. And the bus driver he knew we were going to the hospital. He just decided not to go to the hospital and had gone on a completely different route. So at some point, after about 45 minutes, my guide decided we needed to get off the bus because we had no idea where the bus driver was going, but certainly wasn't going to the hospital anymore. So we got off the bus in the middle of nowhere. I was hardly carrying any money on me because I'd been told not to. I'd had my phone, but my SIM card wasn't working. And sort of no way to call a taxi or anything like that. So we're just in the middle of nowhere. There's just kind of a few houses around. And by this point, I'm starting to feel very, very unsettled because I felt like people were being very hostile to me. And I couldn't really understand why. Like the bus driver had changed. We knew we were going to the hospital. He changed his route. This chap had wanted me to walk in the water. So we managed to track down a taxi, and we got a taxi to the hospital. And then my guide left me. She was wonderful. All of the staff that worked for Work the World were amazing. But so she took me to the hospital and then left me for my shift. And the midwives were there, so I met up with them and had the shift. And I'll come back to that in a bit. And then it was time to go home. So the midwives took their taxi, and I had to get home. So I had enough money to get a taxi, so I kind of got a taxi to the local town in Dar es Salaam where I was, but I couldn't quite remember where the compound was. So I knew it wasn't far, but for the life of me I could not find it. So I was just sort of walking around, and I'd already had like a fairly bad experience earlier on. I had no phone, had no money left, and I just couldn't find the Work the World compound. And I was almost at the point of tears, like I had no idea where I was going. There was no one to call, there was nothing to do. And, obviously no one was looking for me or missing me. And luckily, there was a gentleman who came up to me and he said, "Are you lost?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just can't find, no, it's on the name of this street, but I just can't find it." And he helped me find the compound, and that was brilliant. But I was sort of really, really upset by some of those experiences. And then the next days that my guides weren't coming to the hospital with me, it was for me to sort of go on my own. And the midwives were very sort of set on going together as a four and, sharing the fees and things like that of the taxi. So I sort of found myself in a position where I'm the only person I've got to get this bus, which has already not really, I don't know what I would have done if the guide hadn't have been with me the first time that I got the bus. So I ended up feeling incredibly unsafe. And I ended up going home early, and I felt like a huge failure. I felt like such an embarrassment, both while I was out there and even still now. But there are a few times in life really where you sort of feel, I felt in a really unsafe situation, and I rang my other half and I said, this is what's happening, and I just don't know what to do, and I feel genuinely like I'm really putting myself at risk by continuing. And so we decided that I would come home, and he sorted all of that out for me. So those were the reasons that I came home effectively. The other things I sort of saw were all things that you would, I think, are part and parcel of the elective that I've been briefed on. I did see there was a baby who wasn't doing so well after labour, and there wasn't, whereas in the UK there would have been a team immediately that were going with resus, there just wasn't really anyone who was doing that, and the baby was sort of just left, and one of the midwifery students came and was trying to intubate the baby and trying to, you know, make the baby breathe, but it was just her really, and everyone, I think one of the orderlies was just like, he won't make it, and she was sort of desperately trying to intubate, and I kind of helped her, but I couldn't really contribute very much because my trade as a, you know, I was just qualified as a junior doctor, so I didn't really have much experience in, you know, managing such a poorly baby. And that was very difficult also. In terms of a summary of my elective, would I recommend going with Work the World? Absolutely, in the sense that they sort of delivered on everything that they said they would, in terms of the compound was fine, the food was fine, the staff were amazing, there were, you know, lovely language lessons, great sense of community, we did dancing, we did all kinds of things, and you know, taking us to and from the airport and engaging us with the culture, all that was fine. The only thing that was a bit of an issue, which probably wouldn't have been a problem to anyone that was going in groups of you know, 3 or more, was that this system of trying to encourage us to use the local transport was incredibly problematic if you were a woman alone, which I obviously was. And so that wasn't great, but otherwise it was brilliant. And if you're going in a big group, I'd definitely recommend it. My only comment to Work the World would be is just, you know, if people are alone, you know, I think if I'd been at the hospital with the med students, there wouldn't have been an issue at all. It's just that because I was on my own and the midwives were in a group of 4, and they didn't necessarily want to share taxis or things like that, it put me in a position where I was just completely going to be navigating what ended up to be quite a flexible system of routes and things like that. So I do still feel, in some ways I still feel embarrassed that my elective was such a, you know, poor, you know, I don't know, I failed, didn't I suppose. You know, I tried to travel alone and I wasn't good at it in some ways. They're the kind of things that I still think, but ultimately I think if you're going to be a woman travel alone, the thing that you do need to know is when you reach a limit where you think this is an unsafe situation, and that's what I did. So I did come home, and I finished my elective in the UK, but there you go. I'd love to hear your comments, and please subscribe, and you can find me on Instagram, and you can find me on TikTok as The Surgical Doctor. Thank you, bye.